Alright, what's up everybody? This is my first video, and what I'm going to try to do today is help you guys do something that's been pissing me off with Hyperspin, Retroarch, and Android. And in particular, I'm using the Shield TV. Anyway, some people call it Retroarch. I call it Arc. If you don't like it, keep it to yourself. Anyways, alright, so all the videos that I've found, they've involved using a PC and rocket launcher and other tools that actually do make it easier. Or the videos that I've watched, they're for doing everything and playing on your computer. Well, I'm trying to set it up and do everything on the Shield, and that's what we're going to be doing today. Alright, first thing that you want to do, obviously, is download Hyperspin. After you download Hyperspin, it's going to tell you that you need to download the data for it. It'll tell you where to get it, and it tells you where to put it. You need to put it in the root directory of your hard drive. So do that. Next, you need to install Retroarch. And after you've done that, you will be here. Now, this this app has way more stuff that you could do than I understand. But I'm going to tell you what I understand and what you need to get everything running, and it's very, very simple. Now, first off, I should say I'm going to give you a link to get Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo 64. Get those ROMs, and the reason why that actually matters, I mean, who knows, you probably have thousands of ROMs yourself, but the question is, are they labeled right? And that's the problem that I've had for the last month trying to get this to work with Hyperspin. See, Hyperspin, they use data files, XML, INI, and they have, I mean, I don't know exactly what to call it, but they have I'll say a predetermined list of what it's going to look for. And let's say you have a ROM, Legend of Zelda, and if it's labeled The Legend of Zelda, comma, EU or U for Europe, and you try to play that in Hyperspin, it's not going to work because Hyperspin is looking for The Legend of Zelda, um, open parentheses, USA, close parentheses. And even though you have the ROM and it's found Legend of Zelda, if it doesn't say USA in there like it's looking for, then you're screwed. It's going to tell you that, the ROM is missing, and that's enough to irritate the shit out of you. So anyway, first thing you want to do when you come here is Online Updater, and then Core Updater. Cores are the actual emulators themselves, and Updater is, well, it is the initial installation if you're doing it for the first time, or it then becomes an updater if you're doing this again later on down the road. So we'll keep it simple. Game Boy. Go ahead and click all of them. Game Boy Advance. Now, the only reason why you download all of them is, let's say, later on when we get to the point where we're typing the location and you put in this one, GPSP, and it doesn't work, or it plays, it's sluggish or something, and you want to try VBA next. Well, you've got it downloaded, so that's just one less step later on. Nintendo 64, PlayStation, Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo. Accidentally downloaded Vectrex, but who cares? Alright, so now that we've done that, we are completely done here. Now, don't get me wrong, there are things that you still can do here, things that you actually do need to still do here. Maybe changing aspect ratio if you don't want to play, 4:3 ratio, you want it to be 16:9, whatever. I mean, there's still things to do here, but with what we just did, you can actually start playing games in a second, like you're done with art. So anyways, let's get out of here. Quit RetroArch. Now, I talked a minute ago about how things needed to be labeled perfectly, and I had gigs upon gigs, thousands and thousands of ROMs, and I ended up deleting them. Well, off the Shield anyways. I mean, I still have them on the PC, but off here, I deleted them. And I'll show you why. Right here, found a torrent for everything that I needed. And it's everything that you will need. And simply enough, type in Hyperspin. This one right here, 9 gigs, but it gave me exactly what I wanted. Game Boy Advance, Nintendo 64, NES, Genesis, and Super Nintendo. Sure, if you don't want all these extra ones, you can turn them off or tell it to not download while the torrent's downloading. Obviously it'll download faster, take up less space, or just download the whole thing and delete it later on. That is up to you. So, once you are done with that, alright, let's say that's done. You will end up with, in my case, they downloaded the movies. Now, some of the folders, I've already moved them to the Hyperspin folder. So that's done. You will just get them, unzip them, and in this case, let's say, okay, I haven't done this one yet, Nintendo Game Boy Color. And then here is the RAR. Actually need to create a ROMs folder. Yeah, shit. Need to put this in there. And now can unzip it. And then once it's unzipped, you can move this, cut, paste, move it to your Hyperspin emulators folder, just like I've done with these. So you'll end up with your emulator folder name. Make sure it's labeled properly. Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It can't be SNES or Super Nintendo. It has to be proper. Sega Genesis. Nintendo Game Boy Advance. A space between Game Boy. Very important. And then you have your ROM subdirectory. And this is where that guy is winning in my book. Everything is labeled as it should be. It's labeled the same as what Hyperspin is looking for. And they all have the same, what's the word? They're all the same. Anyways, FSC, SFC. There's no, 7Z, there's no zip file, none of that. It's all the same. And you'll see why that's important here in a second. Alright, so we've done Retroarch. We've downloaded the cores, the emulators within that. I've showed you where to get the ROMs. I've told you how to relabel the ROMs and where to put them. And this is why the naming is so important. When you open up Hyperspin and you go into settings, see, it tells you how everything should be. All these INI files, Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo Game Boy, separate word, Advance. That's what it's looking for. And if you don't give it that, it ain't going to work for you. Alright, so here is Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, the ROM path. If you have put Hyperspin in the root directory and you have put your emulators and ROM subfolder in the emulators folder of Hyperspin, then you simply need to type this. In this case, because we're doing Super Nintendo, ROM path will be simply emulators, Super Nintendo Entertainment System, ROMs, and that's it. And because all of the games are the same file type, they're not zip, and all that stuff, you only need to put SFC. I mean, if there were some zip files in there, then you would, come over here and edit it and type comma zip. Just any games you have, whatever file type they are, you just label them in here with a comma and no spaces. But with the download that I showed you, everything is the same, SFC. Alright, now comes the EXE and the parameter. These are the next two most important things. Now you can actually write this down now. For the EXE, it is com.retroarch.browser.retroactivity.capital activity, Now this will all be the same because we're using all of these emulators for Super Nintendo, Nintendo, Game Boy Advance. They're all coming from RetroArch. If they were coming from, a different emulator entirely, like SNES OID, which is an older emulator from a few years ago that's not really supported anymore. But anyways, it'd be labeled differently. But since it's all RetroArch, that's all you need right there. Now the parameter, I'm going to show you where you will get that from and why this is helpful. So favorite, Google, right there, hyperspin-f-e.com/topic/8304-setup-hyphen-setup-hyphen-android/done. And this is it right here. Now, if you scroll down a little bit, it's going to tell you alright. Now, this is a list of tested emulators and their working INI config files. Now, using RetroArch, it would be exactly what I showed you, the EXE. Everything you're using RetroArch for, COM, RetroArch, yada yada yada. And then the parameters line, which I showed you a second ago, choose from one of the emulator cores. So, if it was, this is an example, if it was PlayStation, you would type in cores, that's always going to be first, and then PCSX, Rearmed, LibRetro, Neon, Android, so. But since we're doing Super Nintendo, scroll down, and I'm using, it'll be cores /SNES 9X _next _libretro _Android so. And if you were doing Game Boy Advance, it would be same thing. EXE would be COM RetroArch yada yada yada. And then what am I using for Game Boy Advance? Shit, I don't remember. Alright, well, to make this easy, let's say Sega Genesis. You would still do the whole COM, retro, all that good stuff, and then under parameters, you would type cores /Genesis plus GX LibRetro Android so. So I just, I don't know, if you can, use your phone or something and pull up this web page on your phone. That way you don't have to do all the bouncing around I'm doing. And if you were using something other than RetroArch, this is an example. So if you were using FPSE under the EXE, you would put in this stuff. But we're not doing that, so that don't matter. Alright, so I will go to Genesis real fast, since that's the one that I gave you an example for. Hyperspin, settings, Sega Genesis. And ROM path, as I told you, it is simply emulators and then the name of your emulator and ROMs. exe is going to be the same for all these because they're all RetroArch, com dot yada yada, and then parameters, cores / Genesis plug plus libretro Android blah blah blah. And if I show you my Sega Genesis ROMs folder, all the file extensions, there we go, that's the word. All the file extensions will be MD. So very simple. I don't need to add zip and all that stuff, just MD. Get out of here, get out of there. See, emulators, Sega Genesis, ROMs, see, they're all MD, 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 MD. Alright, so that's really it. If you've downloaded RetroArch and you did all the core updates like I showed you, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, all that stuff, then you download the emulators, the ROMs, from the torrent that I gave you a link to. You'll get everything properly named. Now, granted, I did have to change the actual folder name for Nintendo Game Boy Advance, but that's not a big deal. That took 5 seconds. It's the naming of the ROMs that's the important thing, and that's why I'm showing you that link, is because you won't have to do anything. Is there other options out there for maybe getting stuff that's perfectly named? Yes, probably. Are there bulk renaming tools so that you can rename all of the ROMs that you have? Yes, I've actually found a couple, but I'm not going to use them. I didn't feel like, doing it on the computer. I wanted to do everything on the Shield. So one quick search in Kick-Ass Torrents and it got me exactly what I wanted. Yeah, so once you set up all of your INIs, Sega, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, once you've done this, emulators, COM RetroArch, SFC, parameters, core, SNES, once you have done that, then you should be